G'day everyone. One of the really interesting things that I keep hearing about, and it keeps popping up every so often, is that Sony Color Science is not as good as other cameras that are out there, and I just don't believe that's the case. A couple of things that I found, remember I did shoot Nikon, I came from shooting the high-end Nikon cameras, and I switched over to Sony, and not one of my clients even noticed the slightest bit of difference in my color that no one even mentioned, David, your color's actually changed. But that's one of the other things that I wanted to talk about here too. It's a lot of it is what you perceive to be the better color that you like. And I wanted to talk about that aspect of it because PDN have just updated their color science full checks. So what they do is they look at different cameras and then they actually check swatches, and this is what they do. They look at these swatches and they see which cameras reproduce the colors as accurately as possible. So that's something that you really do have to consider when you're looking at color science. Remember, not every image that you're going to shoot is skin tone and things like that. Like a lot of the things that you might want to match a car, match a gown, match a product, things like that. And this is where it gets really interesting. Some people prefer the Canon Color Science, but I honestly have done tests where I did one checking between a Canon camera, it was the 5D Mark IV with 70 to 200 millimeter lenses against the Sony A9 with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, and they were almost identical out of camera. In fact, they were very, very close, and that was unedited. And I did want to say too that none of my clients has ever complained when I give them images that I shoot to say, David, your skin colors don't look correct. You know, they're a little bit off. There's something wrong with it. And these are things that I wanted to talk to you about, which seems to be that it's more people from other manufacturers, like other Canon fanboys, people like that tend to love to bag anything that Sony produce. They used to talk about only having one memory card slot. They used to talk about the focus and things like that. And they'll always try and grab the latest thing that they can think about. And then now they can't talk about that anymore. So now they're starting to say that it's the color science. Well, I don't believe it's true. And the latest PDN website proves that fact if you're talking about color science of matching products, and it's really interesting. Now, just to talk about this even a step further, Tony Northrup did a really good talk about this a couple of months ago, and I'll stick the link down below so you can have a look at it. And he actually, I think he gave 1,500 photographers a blind poll. So they didn't know which camera was being selected here for looking at images. And have a look at that video and see what you think as well. But out of all of that, the number one camera that was chosen for color science, that people found the images the most pleasing with color, was Sony. And again, this is a blind test. So this is not people just looking at it saying, oh yeah, I love my Canon colors. This is a blind test of people looking at images and determined that the Sony was number one. Fuji was number two. Nikon was number 3, and then Canon was actually number 4 there if you're looking at it. So these are really interesting figures. So check out Tony's discussion on this because it is a really thorough discussion, and it really sort of matches what PDN are also saying, and that's why I wanted to show you that as well. So let's look at the chart, the PDN chart, and I'll show you how this was done. What they do is they use something called an X-Rite Color Checker Passport, I suppose, and it's a whole series of swatches, and it does give you a description here about what they do. It's a 96 color palette that they're checking here. And basically what they're trying to do is see which camera matches those colors as close as possible. And everything's calibrated and things like that. And then what they do is they measure it to see which cameras come closest to it. And it's interesting how it works out, and it's also very close to what Tony was saying with his tests or with his blind test, what people had chosen to be their best color science, if you could say, or it was their best choice, or what they preferred. So let's look at this, and this is the interesting thing. So the number one has changed a little bit because I think last time it was Sony that was number one, but the Fuji X-T30 is number one. And that's amazing because I've always said all along that I do believe the Fuji color science is really good. And again, so that's number one. So that was ahead on its own. Number 2 was the Fuji X-T3. Now, number 2 is drawn. There's a lot of cameras drawn here, so Fuji has done very well. But then it starts to get into the Sony cameras. So with number 2, so Sony is tied. The a6400 has been now put in there. Now remember, that's Sony's latest camera, so they have improved the color science. Number 2 tied as well is the Sony a7 III. Number 3 is the a7R. So according to these results, the a6400 and the Sony a7 III are the best Sony cameras, tied with Fuji for second place. Number 3 is the a7R, and 3 number tied is the XE3. So Fuji again has done very well, like Sony. Leica is number 3 as well, tied. Sony has come in again at number 4, which is the Sony A9, and I love the colours of the A9 as well as the A7 III. And this may have been done before the update though, because Sony have also improved these updates since probably since that firmware came out, because firmware 5 have improved the colour, so it may change as well. So Sony have come in at number 4. Number 5 is Leica. So we're still not even down to Canon yet. Number 6 is the XH1. Number 6 is the Panasonic GH5S, still tied. Number 7 is Nikon. So according to the things of matching perfectly, Nikon has beaten Canon. Number 7 tied. Oh no, it's equal actually. The EOS M50 is tied. Pentax, and that's the EOS M50. So we're not in the high-end Canon cameras yet. Number 8 is the Pentax. Number 8 is also the Panasonic Lumix. Number 9 is the Panax S1. And down here at number 10, we're finally starting to get into the Canon cameras. So it's down at number 10, which is the EOS R. And then it's the EOS RX100 Mark VI. And 11 is the Canon 6D Mark II. And then it's the Z6 is number 11. And Panasonic G9. I'm not going to go through any more because they just keep going. But the interesting thing that I did want to say here is that there's a lot more to color science than just what you would call the perfect skin tone. There is also matching the perfect colors that are out there. And like I said, if you're dealing with fashion, if you're dealing with cars, if you're dealing with anything where color can be critical, obviously the closer that the cameras will match those swatches, the better the color science actually is. And like I said, when Tony did those tests, and they were people in those tests, most people were choosing the Sony, and then Fuji came in at number 2, I think it was. Let me just scroll back to that for a second. Yeah, so it's... Sony was number 1, Fuji was number 2, Nikon was number 3, and Canon was number 4. So it sort of matches, except for Fuji was number 1 with those latest cameras. The X-T30 was number 1 in there. So it's really an interesting test. So I think if you're a Sony user, don't get upset by what you keep hearing from people saying that the Sony color science is not any good, and the same with Fuji. The Sony and Fuji obviously have excellent color science if you're dealing with matching those swatches overall. And like I said, I've never ever had a client say to me, David, your skin tones for your models is not right, there's something wrong, or something like that. I think that's a fallacy. I don't think it's really there. I think it's just people that want to nitpick things, and they just want to believe themselves that their product is better or the Canon is giving more pleasing colors. But as Tony showed with that test, once there's a blind test done, people cannot tell the difference, or when they can tell the difference, but they don't choose the so-called Canon color science that everyone says is better skin tones. Let me know your thoughts down below. I'd love to know what you think about this, and I'll see you all soon in the next video. Bye for now.